Welcome to Shut Up and Sit. I'm Yedda Stansel, a consciousness coach and consultant. I'm on a mission to bring mindfulness to the modern world. Each week, we will offer ancient healing practices, real-world examples, and the latest research in neurobiology and behavior change into fun conversation that invites you to wake up your highest self. Now, let's go shut up and sit. All right, welcome back to the show, everybody. Yedda here again, as always. And you know what I'm about to say? I am excited to be here for many, many reasons today. One is because I just got out of the last episode on anger and anger management and techniques. And that's a hard one to sit with. And two, because I'm sitting here with a very dear friend and a client, a former client, Stuart. Welcome. How are you?
I'm great, Yedda. Thanks for having me.
Oh, man. You know, we were just talking before the show. We probably could have had you on the episode for anger. But you're in the right episode, because actually, you guys, if you're reading the book and you're following along on the show, Stuart's testimonial is actually in chapter 8, which is where we're now going into, which is all about habits. And you have a lot of wisdom to share with us about not only the work you've done with this shut up and sit process, but for you and I, but really about habits. You have literally deconstructed and reconstructed some amazing major habits in your life. And I don't want to take us to the mountaintop quite yet, because I'd like for our listeners and our viewers to get to know you. So what do you say when people are like, so Stuart, tell me a little bit about you?
Well, the answer would have been very different had I not spent a bunch of time with Yedda. The answer now is 30 years as a corporate executive that had a lot of habits that Yedda and I rewired. There were certain things, as she said, I maybe could have been in the anger chapter, but we're more in the habits chapter, where you're coming in and with spending a lot of time with Yedda and all of the coaching that we did, very different person pre-Yedda, post-Yedda, and it is a lot about habits. But I'm 30 years corporate executive, sales, leadership, leading big groups of people. And what I realized after spending time with Yedda is I spent too much of the time having everything be about me and my ego and vanity and not listening very well and kind of type A influencer trying to get things done without taking enough time to sit down and reflect and listen better. Which is really the question of who am I? And when we ask ourselves that, when you ask yourself that now today, who am I, versus when you asked yourself before we worked on this work, who am I, was very different. And so it changes. I'm a different person pre-Yedda and post-Yedda. I mean, but I love that. I love you're coming in today to talk, to teach. We talked about before the show started, educating, empowering, entertaining our listeners. And it was so much fun to work with you. It's still fun to have you come back and share. Right. And I do love seeing I'm going to call it the pre-Stuart and the post-Stuart around the evolution of not killing the ego or getting rid of it, but more the right size relationship with all of who you are. Right. And so I'm curious, when you talk about the pre-Stuart, the Stuart before you did all of this work, how would you have defined success then? Clearly on getting the task done, regardless of people involved, anything to get the task done from a competitive standpoint. Is I wanted it done come hell or high water. I wanted it done on my time frame. I wanted it done my way, and you were either going to get on board or get run over.
Yeah.
Just from the influencer and being hyper competitive and being so goal centric, that was the end all be all, was accomplishing the goal. Be damn how you got there. We were going to get it done. And I did it too much from the standpoint of a lone wolf. Mm-hmm. I thought that I was good leader and would bring everyone in, and on reflection.
Well, you got shit done and you made a lot of money for the people you worked for.
Yeah, I got shit done. I didn't always have people liking the way that I got shit done. And at the end of the day, you want people following the leader, not getting in line and me dictating as to what they do. I wasn't empowering them to do anything. I was like, okay, I think that's a good idea, but we're going to do it my way.
Yeah.
I've been doing this for 25 years. I'm successful. You're 25 years old. You don't know, so let's do it this way, which doesn't help them grow, doesn't help me grow. It's too much of a my way or the highway. And upon reflection, that's just a terrible way to help other people grow and to help yourself grow and learn.
Yeah. And I'm curious, because when you first walked in, and we can talk about what brought that about. But when you first walked in and we started working together, did you have any clue or awareness that way of leadership was just a habitual pattern that you had learned somewhere? Or did you really just think it was who Stuart was?
I just thought it was who I am from the standpoint of being hyper-competitive since a very young age. Even though you played sports and you were on teams, I always wanted to be kind of the alpha, the one in charge, the one that I was going to get things done and you were going to get on board and I was going to lead you through it, which actually wasn't leading you through it. It was dragging you to it. Mm-hmm. So I don't know if it was something that was an innate, something that you learned in your early career. When I look back and reflect on it, it's probably something that have been like since I was 6 or 7 years old.
Yeah.
And learned younger and just repeated in high school. And when you get into the working world, it was your personality.
Yeah.
And it was what you did. And it was successful young. It was successful in the career. And I'm thinking, that seems to be working. Why change it?
Yeah. And so when you came to work with me, and so it's important for you all that are listening and being with us here today to understand that I do have chapter in each, not all the chapters, but in several chapters in the book, I have client testimonials, and their names are their pseudo names is what I should call them, because you're going to see that Stuart's is actually Bruce B in chapter 8, but we came up with Bruce B because you remember we talked about this, and so Bruce B stands for who?
The Hulk.
Yeah, Bruce Banner,
yes.
who turns into the Hulk.
Yes.
And so that's why I said we could have put you in the chapter on anger. And so that is an exercise I do have my clients do. And part of the narrative coaching is identifying the story you're telling yourself in the world. And so this Hulk, this Bruce Banner essence, this archetype that you were kind of using to lead, what you realized and what we talked about was that was just something that somebody taught you to get your needs met in a very limited, very protective, very egoic way. And we all learn it, you all. Every single one of us are doing this at varying degrees. And so there's nothing wrong. And so we just kind of brought that story out into the open and said, so let's talk about Bruce. Let's talk about what triggers him, what brings out the Hulk. And so in chapter 8, we're actually breaking down the cue, the trigger, and the reward, kind of that habit loop that we talk about. And Charles Duhigg is one of my favorites. You've watched his TED Talk. It's in here. He's got a great book, The Habit Loop. And so what I love about this work is, and I remember the first time I very vividly remember seeing your face, just kind of the light coming on and saying, so somebody just taught you some really shitty ways of getting your needs met either directly or indirectly. And this whole idea of trauma and drama and wounding creates another sense of self. And that's the job of the ego to say, Stuart, this is too hard to deal with. This is too painful. Whatever you're dealing with, I'm going to step in and I'm going to teach you to do this so you can protect yourself and make sure this never happens again and you can get your needs met. And so we don't have to dive into that story, but we identified there was a story and a moment for you that the Hulk, he was created as a very protective mechanism for you. And what I think is important, and I'd love your thoughts on this for our listeners, is that's not something we just beat away and dismiss because he's not going to go away. He doesn't just want to get cut off. He's a part of your identity that really serves a purpose. And so do you remember the awareness came, but then we also did the work to say, how could we have some benefits of the good parts of the Hulk? And we let him stay, but he doesn't have to fuck everything up.
Yeah, he clearly was the event that happened when I was a teenager. It was all about protection and ego for me. So it would become mild manner, Bruce Banner, listening to things. And when anything went the way that I wasn't comfortable with, the Hulk came out from an anger and an ego and a protection. And so it was learned, 12 or 13 years old during the event, and then just grew. And the Hulk was always there. And the older I got through high school, through college, in the career, the Hulk reared its ugly head a lot more than mild-mannered Bruce Banner. And I didn't understand until Yedda and I did the work together when it was created, when kind of that split personality happened.
Yeah, and it happens for all of us, every single one of us. I want to make sure you guys hear that. Like, the split personality is not just a disorder. It's literally, there's an egoic self, and then there is the quiet, silent, still Stuart, the self in you that kind of just disappeared and tucked far, far away and said, don't come back out, you'll get hurt.
No, I think without question, the Hulk was my protector And, the kid that kind of left that year in 1980 when the event happened rarely came back out. Mm-hmm. It was the Hulk dominating 70 or 80% of the personality and the time from a protection standpoint. And it wasn't until Yedda and I worked together that I understood it. I didn't think about what the event caused and how it changed personalities and how it kind of took this 12-year-old Stuart and kind of tucked him away. The Hulk came out from a protection standpoint, and it ended up being anger, quick trigger, always the Hulk. And you didn't have a lot of negative ramifications from it, or I didn't sense them at the time.
Well, who's going to mess with the Hulk?
Not very many. And it was a quick trigger.
And there's a show about this. I remember being 5 years old and watching the very first episode ever of the Hulk and Lou Ferrigno and Bruce turning into the Hulk and being like wide-eyed and like, oh my God. And so of course you didn't notice a lot of ramification because nobody fights back to the Hulk. The Hulk doesn't lose. He doesn't.
Yeah, and that, looking back on it, clearly created my management style, mm-hmm. leadership style, relationship style, be it work, be it personal, be it whatever type of relationship that you have. I thought it was just, Gemini, two personalities, that's fine. It wasn't until we kind of talked about it and talked about the event and what it triggered is that over the years I had no way or no really knowledge of it. So I had no way to deal with it, no way to kind of understand the Hulk, why he came out, what he was there for, how did it continue to grow until we talked about the event and you have that aha moment where you're like, that's really an event in my past that I've tried to bury.
Yeah.
Buried Stuart, 12-year-old Stuart, and Bruce Banner when he turned into the Hulk was the protector.
Yeah.
And it grew from 12 to 22 to 32 to 42, not knowing. And I think over time, the anger kind of just increased and the Hulk was quicker to come out. And it affected relationships with parents, kids, spouse, clearly work, where you'd get up, and I know this isn't the chapter on anger, but you would get up and
I would dippy toe back into it a little bit.
I would be pissed off by 7:15 in the morning because you'd get up, first thing you do is you'd crash 2 cups of coffee, you'd take a shower, you'd think about all you had to do, you'd get in the car to come downtown and you'd be pissed and no way to deal with it. So you went through the day like that, and it is, in hindsight, exhausting.
Oh, yeah.
To live with that type of personality.
Yeah, and that's actually what I was going to ask as you were telling that story is just to connect and offer some compassion to our listeners and viewers. We spend so much time and energy to keep that identity and that story alive and to feed. Mm-hmm. That's why we're never satisfied. There isn't enough money, clothes, food, alcohol, drugs, sex, you name the addictions.
Yep.
We are in all of them because we are constantly feeding something that is a bottomless pit. And mm-hmm. that's when our ego gets out of right relationship, because we talked about this, and it's important for you all to understand the ego has a purpose. I've talked about this on several episodes, and it's what gets us up in the morning to brush our teeth, mm-hmm. to feed ourselves, to keep us from walking out in traffic and getting slammed by a bus. So the soul allows the ego to be created, and it's necessary for self-preservation, for survival. It's when it gets really out of proportion, and that's really what I help my clients do. And it's funny, Stuart, I was reading something the other day, and one of these ladies just talking about coaching, and she said, so your ideal client is you 5 to 10 years ago. And I went, oh man. And I thought, oh man, I was a hot mess. I was in that space of the, yep. I mean, the listeners know that. I mean, the face plant off the high dive into the pool to find out there was no water. And so this awakening, the suffering, and the amount of energy that we have to contribute to keep that alive.
Yes.
When clients come in and they'll say, "Guys, this sounds like a lot of work, Yedda," and I'm like, I promise you, it's easier to do this work than it is to continue living the lie and feeding the monster yep. that is inside of you, that is running the show, that's not really who you truly are.
Yeah, the monster for me clearly was the Hulk. And then what happened over years is, alcohol on top of the Hulk is a terrible combination, but it was ways that I thought were easier for me to deal with to keep things suppressed.
It was a numbing, yeah.
It was a numbing, and it was you do this, you forget about this. You do this, you forget about this. But what you realize now is the numbing had the Hulk come out at a much quicker pace than a alcohol-induced Bruce Banner. So that led to other issues with the Hulk coming out more and anger, and you were on this just repeating cycle or this merry-go-round.
And that was your habit loop.
Get off of. That was my habit loop. That was wake up, get pissed off, go to work, do a happy hour, drink some drinks, go to bed at 11, rinse, repeat. Yeah. And in hindsight, that's exhausting and so different from where I am now. It's like, how did you live that long repeating that loop and just not blow up and have really bad things happen in your life from a relationship standpoint?
Yeah. Well, and so you mentioned blow up. And so you did have a blow up. And I'm going to let you decide how much you share about that blow up, because it's what led us to work together.
Yes.
And so you couldn't maintain the Hulk, and none of us, the secret thing I really believe is that deep down inside, that little silent, still part of us that does get buried, it's way, way under the rubble, and it's just a quiet whisper. And it's still putting that little please, please, please. Yes. And then eventually the ego, and this is, today I was talking on a group call before this episode with some ladies about suffering, and people want to get away from their suffering. They don't want to suffer. And I said, but our suffering is our wake-up call. It's the breakdown that leads to the breakthrough. So you had one.
I did.
And I'll let you talk about how much of that you want into detail. Sure. That's totally up to you. But I think our listeners could really understand that here's this guy who on the outside had it all together.
Yeah.
And that was your habit loop, the life you were living. And where did it get you? What was your wake-up call?
Clearly I was a hot mess, but had lived so long in this pattern and not had any negative consequences from a relationship standpoint, from a career standpoint. And we talked about it kind of, numbing. Mm-hmm. And we'll talk about the incident. And now when I talk about the incident, I talk about, a higher power kind of making this the incident, making this your wake up and kind of your aha moment. Like, dude, you're really going to screw things up in a big way if you don't address this. So it was work. And I told you it was get up, slug coffee, get pissed off, go to work, do a happy hour, go home, rinse, repeat. After a happy hour that probably was a happy 2 hours, was driving home very close to home, got pulled by the cops, knew that it may be an issue because the happy hour had become 2. Lo and behold, you get a DUI. It becomes an issue at work. The company that I was working for said, you know what, I think you need to take a little sabbatical and we'd really like you to work with Yedda. I'm still the Hulk. I'm still pissed off. I'm like, fuck this. Why do I need to take a sabbatical? I'm fine. I made a mistake. Who the hell's Yedda? I had met her once, and she had come to the office talking about meditation. I'm meditating in the back, texting things, et cetera, paying no attention. But when you go through it, and we probably went through a year of coaching, maybe 2 years of coaching in 3 months.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
We were getting together
when you first
a
walked
couple
in,
of times a week.
Yeah, the first day, and it's funny, and and I say this a lot on the episode, my mom sometimes calls and she's like, honey, now, do you have to drop so many F-bombs? Well, with Stuart, yes, I do, okay? And here's why. I remember the very first session you came in, I think you said fuck like 37 times. And it was friggin', fraggin', fargin',
yes.
And I was like, oh, man. I mean, the intensity and the anger, because you came in, and where we're filming our show is where I also work with my clients. Right there, this chair is behind us. And Stuart sat down, and you sat down, and we were just chit-chatting, and I was just watching and observing. And I really was in the question of, I don't know if this guy wants to do this work. And B, I always hold space that it's possible for anybody to do this work. But when we did talk about that, or I should say, and when we talked about that, it was a real offer that you didn't have to say yes to.
Correct.
And so I'm curious, when you were sitting there and you remember going into this place, so here you are, you've had a DUI, the Hulk has started to just he's still fighting. In that first session, he was just like, and even your body language, you're like, what do you have that I don't? And I'm like, I don't have anything that you don't have, but I can help you find what you have and what I have and what we all have inside of ourselves. And we can deconstruct and give you some inner freedom that these are just habits, they're patterns, they're stories, they're wounds. All of it is something that you can actually go within and do some work with. And you mentioned the meditation, and so doing the mindfulness, and I do a lot in corporate around that. But what's interesting is you said earlier you didn't know, and the awareness piece of mindfulness.
Yes.
So here you were not only asked to come in and talk to somebody who is going to use words like mindfulness and meditation, but she's also talking about, and I'm talking about, stories and narrative and a lot of what I would call esoteric work that was not just therapeutic. It was, hey, you want to play a game? We're actually going to do some somatic work, and we're going to get you to tap into where that lives in your body. And I mean, stuff that some clients don't expect in executive coaching or leadership development, for sure. But what was it about you that knew this was something you wanted to go into?
I think I realized once the event happened that I was losing control, that I couldn't control the Hulk. And being type A, being very controlling, being so ego-driven, it was very hard for me to sit back and let someone help and listen and be willing to listen to something that would better my life. And I think it came to me in our first or second session. I was like, what the hell? Let's give it a roll. Because Yedda and I got along personally, very similar personalities in certain regards.
Oh, I think I gave you back 38 F-bombs. I'm like, all right,
Yes.
I'll see your
So
37 and I'll raise you one.
I could do this every day. And it was kind of walk me through what we're going to do, from mindfulness, meditation, habit loop, reading books like The Surrender Experiment, and doing a lot of TED Talks. And it was so much kind of positivity, which isn't a world that I had lived in. The Hulk lives in kind of negative anger world. Yeah. And I hadn't lived in positivity, and I hadn't thought about rewiring and changing habits and owning your morning and the habits that you have in the morning, how it can transform and transition to your day of something that you want to attack, that you want to live, versus just trying to get through it and control your anger. So it was, what the hell? I like what I'm hearing. I like Yedda. Let's give it a whirl. So a little forced at the beginning to kind of be here based on kind of company I was working for. This is kind of suggestion that wasn't a suggestion. This is a fact. This is going to happen. You're going to do this. And so that may have been a little bit of the resentment and the 38 F-bombs to your 37, that first get together. But then I had this moment of almost letting go and saying, okay, let's see where this takes us.
Yeah.
I'm in a bad spot right now. And I think I'm so curious that I was like, different, hadn't heard much about it. Kind of rewiring, kind of narrative these TED Talks. I said, I'm on a sabbatical. I have the time. What the hell? Let's try it. Let's go typical type A control. Let's go 180 miles an hour. Let's knock this out and let's see where it goes.
Yeah, yeah. And, the truth is actually, it was offered up to you, but I remember your CEO saying, to me, this is a situation, would love to have you work with Stuart. And I said, this is what I say, you all, to all of my clients and even their, whether it's their executive team or whoever they're working with and for, is I'd be happy to sit down and have a conversation, but I will not make a guarantee. And honestly, I say no more than I say yes. And I told you that to clients, because this is not easy work for the faint of heart.
It is not.
And it doesn't mean you can't do it and start the journey and be on it at some level, but the level you wanted to go into this to fight those demons, to fight those rattlesnakes, it's a discernment for me. And the coaching and the consulting space that narrative coaching and narrative release live in, it's important to say this is, if you're not able to walk in and do that work and here's it's so interesting that we don't talk about this in personal development. Did you know you have to have a really strong ego to do this work? So your Hulk actually became the very energy we called on to do the work, to go within, to clean up all the rubble and all the shit, and to look at the wounds and look at the stories and help you rewrite them and rewire and put it all back together in a new habit. And that's not something we talk about in personal development. The norm is, I've got to let go of everything about who I've been to figure out who I am so I can actually become who I want to be. And I've got news for you. They're all the same people.
Yes.
They're all characters and roles. And so the activity that you had was just not taught and wielded in a way that you could say, this is actually a superhero power. That's why he's called the Hulk.
Correct.
People. And when can I bring him in? And you brought him in to do some really heavy lifting on your soul, on your spirit, on your body, on your mind. And that's the piece that I love about this work is asking and knowing when someone's ready to do it. So honestly, I think the more screwed up people are, the easier this work is because
real easy for me then.
and knowing that I had been through the very similar thing, and we talked very transparently and openly. My story looked a little bit differently, but the ability for you to do this work and go with them. And you're right, we did condense what I would normally do with a client in a summer, and it was you were on a sabbatical.
Yes.
But what a gift that was given to you to be able to come in and do that work. And we even talked about, I mean, it was warp speed. It was probably stretched out event really over a 6-month window, but we had 3 months of intense 2 to 3 sessions a week to really go into this work. So I think that's important to say, so people understand you could do this work. It could take you 12 years, 12 months, 12 days, 12 weeks. It's really up to you. And you made that commitment and you used that energy to help you. You didn't get rid of it and say, you can never come back, Hulk.
Correct.
You said, you're welcome here, but we're going to work together. And it's actually a word that we talked a little bit at the end called integration. We integrated. When we get wounded, you guys, this is important. And it's just a habit we learn. When trauma and drama come in, the wounding is like a shotgun, and that wound comes in. And what we do to protect ourselves is we take the energy of the experience and then we shoot it back out into like bazillions of fragments of ourself out into everything. And we can call that projection. We can call that, people, places, things. It can be energy. It's everywhere outside of us because the psyche says this is too painful for you to deal with. So I am going to blast it into a million bits of little subatomic particles and throw it back out into the universe because you can't handle it. And your work, and this is the work that's in this course and in this book, you all, is to take it all and bring it back in. But you don't do it all in one fell swoop. You do it bit by bit by bit. And you're still doing it. I'm still doing it. All of us learning this are still doing it. And then what happens is you go, oh, I can eat this one little crumb and deal with this one little part.
Yes.
But we're not asking you to take the whole event and experience in one moment and bring it back in and try to get back into right relationship with it. And that's really what you learn to do.
Yeah, for me, when I look back on kind of the event and the sabbatical, the only word that comes to mind for me is gratitude.
So funny, because chapter 9's about gratitude. Look at you. You knew that because you knew the work. But that's gratitude's important.
And when you say that you're thankful for getting a DUI or thankful for a sabbatical, it did really change my habits from, getting up early in the morning to reading, to writing, to meditating. But the most important thing that I do each and every morning is the next chapter in the book, is sitting down and being grateful and having gratitude for the things in your life that are really good. Before this, I'd always focused on the negative, not what you're grateful for. Be that family, be that health, or getting into the habit of writing down each and every day what you're grateful for just rewires you to start your day on a very, very different path.
Yeah,
and that
creates a whole new habit.
Much more exciting and just makes the days easier, more fun. Yeah. Gratitude and grateful for everything that you have in your life. And you have to be willing to change, and you have to be willing to look within and be challenged and understand the root cause of the pain and how to address it. Yeah. And then some of the exercise that Yedda and I did, I remember her making me write a letter to my mom who had passed. And a lot of the anger in the event was mom-driven when I was a teenager. She had passed for a couple of years, and Yedda said, you need to write a letter to her. Okay, about what? About how you feel, about forgiveness, about pouring your heart into this letter. And I was like, okay. And then after the letter, I do what? Well, you go to her gravesite, you read the letter, and then you burn it. And I said, hold on. I'm going to write the letter that's hard enough. Then I'm going to go and read it at my mom's grave. And then there I'm going to burn it. And I'm in this. I'm competitive. I'm like, I'm going to do all this. Is great. It's going to be no problem. Write the letter. You go down. You read it. You burn it. It is emotional on so many levels. But I told Yedda this. Once it was over, once I made sure the letter was out, got back in the car, it was emotional, but in a good way. It was empowering. It was relief. It was a release.
Yeah, you released
of
the story.
A lot of the things that I'd held for 40 years. Mm-hmm. And so it was meaningful and had purpose clearly. And this is only one of the things that we did during our 3 to 6 months.
Yeah.
So it was being willing to put the ego aside and do these things.
And, you know, and you did put the ego aside in the negative context of the ego, but he was still there to give you the courage and strength to do the actual get out of the car. You're going to like it was like if you could imagine having the Hulk be your best friend and he's the one that's there to say, I'm here to protect you and you're going to be fine. I don't need to destroy anything, but I need to get you out of the car.
Right.
And now I need to get you to the graveside. And now I need to get you to the next. And so this is where I want you all to hear that. That's the right relationship with ego. And I say right, not in the sense of duality, like right and wrong. I'm talking about right in this loving, caring, like you're in right relationship. Everything is, it has a reciprocity. It feels good. And there's love and compassion and connection with yourself. That's what you were letting go of, the story of the fragmentation and disconnection of self, that you were trying to get everybody else to give you the very thing that you ultimately learned in that moment to give yourself, which was the forgiveness, which was the connection, which was the love, the gratitude, and all of that. And I love this. And in this work, you all, and Stuart, you know, obviously you've gone through all the chapters and all the different content in the book. And on the online course, I mentioned some of these additional exercises and rituals are really important, and they're powerful. And that's one of the things we talked about. So rituals, you all, is important in this work because rituals take what's up out here in the esoteric, in the sacred space of whatever word you want to use in the universe, God, power, source, and it allows it to come in through the physical down into our actual felt, seen, heard world in a very unique, different way. And in narrative release and actually we did narrative coaching and narrative release with you, which are two sides of the same coin. But in narrative coaching, we helped you to identify the story. And then in narrative release, you learned how to let go of the story. And mindfulness, you all, is really the bridge that's in the middle. So narrative coaching is really what this book is about. Shut Up and Sit is about that thinking, feeling, behaving. You know all about that. You learned about that. You learned about mindfulness, how it interrupts the pattern. It gives you space to separate the thoughts, to insert and go, I'm not going to be created by the next thought. I'm going to now create the next thought, which was a habit. And so we started really teaching you all of this. And then you realized that anger was just a pattern too. And when we get to the habit chapter, this is where the narrative release started to come in your work. And you realized, I am creating new habits. The ritual, and we did lots. We did the threshold ritual where we talked about what am I leaving behind? I'm crossing the threshold. What am I moving towards? So in this work, there's lots and lots of ways. So it's interesting. I'm thinking about my next book already. And so this one, Shut Up and Sit, which is finding silence and all the life-changing magic that comes with it, which teaches that whole thinking, feeling, behaving, goes into mindfulness, gratitude, and habits. The next one is Stand Up and Speak. And so what you learned when you went in and did the inner work, you shut up and sat down and went inside. Where did all this come from? Self-inquiry, all of these different questions that you answered, these things we did. You then rewired and created a new habit that said, now I'm going to get up and go out into the world and I'm going to try different things in different ways and see what outcomes I get. So you started practicing gratitude. You started releasing the old story and stepping into creating, deliberately creating a new one, awake, aware, and available, conscious and sober. Where did that take you?
It's one thing that when we talk about the book, Shut Up and Sit, it was for me, any moment of silence used to drive me crazy. So when Yedda would talk about, let's do, get the Calm app or whatever you're comfortable with and go through that. And I'm like, okay, I'm in, I'm trying it. And I remember the first time I tried to sit through a 5-minute Calm app, and it was all about breathing and all about, if you're thinking, let it go. If you're thinking, let it go. My brain is going 180 miles an hour, and I'm like, how on earth is this going to help me? And it's like anything else that you hear, 28 days to make or break a habit. I think that's great. I'll keep trying. And I kept trying, and it got easier, and it just slowed me down and helped me
literally create space. Yeah, you did. You shut up and sat and got some inner space.
Create, some calm, create some inner space. And what the habits of the Calm app and gratitude and other things that I do each and every morning, it made me calmer. It made me more patient. And then what I wanted to do in relationships was to see the difference that it made. So it wasn't so much shut up and sit, it was shut up and observe.
Yeah.
And so all of a sudden, I'm trying to put these new habits into relationships, be they work or be they personal, and not react. And the one thing that I have done in a lot of this is taken ego out of it and trying to make sure that you don't take it personally. You don't know where people are coming from. They're not coming after you. You're the one that's reacting. Mm-hmm. You're controlling your reaction. You don't know their intent. You're just inferring things that trigger the Hulk. Then you go in that bad circle again, where this was shut up, sit, observe, and then see what happens positive from the relationships when you do that.
Yeah. And then you get choice. You have freedom of choice to do something different than what you've always done, which is what a habit is. You guys, 99% of what you're suffering with, I promise you, it's just a pattern. We're just a bundle of patterns and habits. And when you shut up and sit down and go within and do the work, you start to realize, oh, this is where I first experienced that, or this is where that moment brought that about. So mindfulness and meditation isn't just this Zen place we go to where we just see pink elephants and rose petals and you don't think. This was one thing that you and I talked about. I said, you still think, you're just aware of thinking. And then when you become aware of something and you place your attention on it, it slows down. Then after a habitual pattern begins to build, you can call on what you cultivate in that silent stillness, whether it's in the morning, afternoon, whatever, in that practice, out into the world as you're observing and going, oh, look at this, and then that. And you can start to see, oh, there's a pattern and habit I would typically go down. Oh, but I think I'm going to go down this way. And I've said this a lot on the show, Stuart, and you may remember me saying this to you. Mindfulness doesn't fix or cure anything. What mindfulness gives us is the ability to recover. And we recover quicker. And so we might recover 5 days after an event, but we keep sitting, we keep shutting up. Then it might be 5 hours. Then it gets to be 5 minutes. And then eventually the power of present moment awareness in real live time, and I know you've gotten here because we've talked about this, is being aware of what's happening, watching a situation and knowing that could, and it potentially would trigger me, but I'm going to get out of the way of it and stay in this moment and not take the bait, not take the hook and go down a path of an old habit. And I'm going to turn my energy and my choices to creating a new experience because I have built another habit. The habits are always there. Your mindfulness just gives you the ability to put your awareness and attention on the one that creates the outcome where everybody experiences love, joy, peace, harmony, equanimity, including you.
Yeah, I think one of the things that it also, I know one of the things that, kind of the anger to habits to gratitude to the 3 chapters in a row, doing this has kept me more present, not reflecting on what was or what is because you don't know. And if you don't, accept and embrace the past to grow and then spend a lot of time in the present because the future is unknown.
Yeah.
How do you react to the present? How do you keep your calm? How do you listen and try to go down different paths? So this, mindfulness and kind of the morning routine has made me more in the present.
Yeah.
Self-observant, self-aware, what's happening now.
And self-management.
Yes.
And ultimately, when you get to the place where I know you are and I am and a lot of my clients have gotten to is when I can meet all my own needs in my own inner world, in my own silent, still space of being with Yedda, of being with Stuart, what happens is my whole person, that integration, right, all those particles, those fractals, they come back, and my whole self is there with you. Just like right now, we're two whole people that creates a third experience. And so the burden isn't on you to make me happy, me to make you happy. Our full present and our whole healed selves are already here, you all. It's just the work of coming back into awareness with it. Then the third experience can be here, and we can go our separate ways. And whether we come back in 6 months, 6 days, 6 years, the experience is a separate place. And that happens in all relationships, spouses, kids, work, community. You're in line at the grocery store, and all of a sudden it's not, there's an othering. It's what I call it mindful. like, you know, I've got to get you away from me because you're something other than what I am. We're all uniquely different and the same, but we're experiencing something and going, you're being you, I'm being me. And then the third experience is allowed to be there. And that's what non-judgment is. It's just an experience.
Which was really, really hard for me, as much as we talked about, is clearly very judgmental. You know, very quick to go, nope, yes, as it relates to people, relationship scenarios. Now, getting away from being so judgmental and being in the present and trying to control kind of the anger of the Hulk, doing that not only in everyday life, but trying to focus on that, especially with the kids, because habits and patterns and behaviors are a lot observed and learned.
Yeah.
So when you have this long period of the Hulk coming out more than he should have, when your kids are in very young ages from, 5 to 15, and that's what they observe for 10 years, and you see it a little bit in both of them a couple of years ago. And I think now, as I've worked on the habits and worked about shutting up and sitting and listening and controlling Bruce Banner a little bit, it's interesting to see how the conversations with the kids have evolved and how they don't have the little bit of the Hulk that I started to see in them. Mm-hmm. It's not as present as it was because it's not as present as it was in me.
Yeah. So you're breaking generational, literally bondage and patterns. That's all, when people talk about, generational bondage, it's just patterns and habits that are passed down.
Yep.
And you're breaking that little by little, and then your kids are going to break it. And so we do this work, we shut up and sit for ourselves, but ultimately when we do it for ourselves, we realize it impacts everything and everyone around us. So right now in life, how would you describe how things are for you?
I'm grateful, which is a good thing. I think things are in a very good way, or as good as they can be, raising two teenagers. Two teenagers, as you know, having one a couple of years ago when he was still a teenager, is trying. And I think that's really had me work on patience and being present, but still getting up and being grateful and changing my perception about stop worrying about keeping up with the Joneses or how you think other people perceive you.
Well, now you realize we're all just thinking about ourselves, nobody else, right?
Yeah, and you think they're judging you based on this or that, and then they're all about their own self-ego on them. Once you go at maybe 50-some years old, I really could give a you-know-what about what other people think of me. It's, what do I think of myself?
Yeah.
How present am I in relationships that matter to me? And if I can go through each day, each week, each month, each year, worrying about Stuart, keeping happy Stuart, being really present and tight in my relationships that matter to me, things are good.
Yeah. And I love that because you're showing up and this new pattern, this new habit that you're operating from, that we all operate from when we get to this place in this work is, and I love this saying, and somebody said it, my mom says it reminds me of this all the time, and she says, honey, when you realize you have everything, you need nothing. And when you need nothing, you realize you have everything. And I'm like, well, that's good, but I do need a few new pair of shoes, and I do like to have, and I'm being silly, but it really, that's what inner freedom looks like.
Yes.
And you're now living and operating with that inner freedom. Work is good, life is good. And you know what? You're still going to have moments where life's going to throw you some curveballs. But now the whole beautiful part of this work is the inner freedom's great, but the inner freedom allows you to handle whatever is coming to you and to be fully present right here, right now with it.
And trying to learn from each thing.
Yeah. What if it's all here to help you, not hurt you?
And that's kind of what we talked about what we deem the incident.
Yeah.
Is now, okay, is a higher power or something in the universe putting something out there that you're to deal with to grow.
Yeah.
And when you think of it from that standpoint, you take it as a positive challenge. Okay, this is here. This is in front of me. How am I going to deal with it? What am I going to learn from it? Versus, oh, shit, why is this in my life? Going negative versus going, all right. It's kind of the whole surrender.
Yeah, and this is what I'm hearing you say is you've now built a habit, a patterned way of living and being that has the ability for deliberate choice, that has the ability to operate from a place of gratitude, that works on a daily habit of being in a place of focusing on there's more right than there's wrong, so that positivity. These were just things that you didn't learn. And this is what I love about this, you all. If we didn't learn them, then it's never too late to learn them. The brain can rewire. You've heard a lot already on these episodes about neuroplasticity, and Philip came in and talked all about what happens in the brain. And ultimately what we're cultivating with mindfulness is, and I don't know if you know about this, Stuart, but mindfulness, and this is new language since we've worked together, I've been learning and telling clients, mindfulness literally teaches us the habit and pattern to cultivate a belief system of I am enough. Mm-hmm. And when we can operate from enoughness, that's surrender, that is acceptance, that's all of what you're talking about, that's choice, that's responsiveness. All of those things come into alignment. Everything in life is just, it's easier. It's not always going to be easy, but it's easier because pain is inevitable, suffering is optional. And so what I'm hearing and what I love about you coming to talk about with us today is you're operating from a place of a deep place of empowerment, of truth, and of knowledge that you have everything you need inside of you. And that wholeness is what you're spending time with, and you're showing up and offering that to the world now instead of saying to the world, you owe me something.
It's a lot of you and I talked about, being comfortable with yourself, talking about, I am worthy, I am what I need, I am fulfilled from within.
Yeah.
And then that comes from
outside. And really, literally, for you, for me, for people listening, watching, how many of you would love to wake up every day and radically self-accept and self-love and have self-worth and know that right here, right now is exactly enough, and that everything is inside of you that you need, and you're going to be okay, and you're going to get through whatever this is? How many of you would love to wake up and cultivate that? That's ultimately what this work allows us to do. And I can keep talking about this forever. If you've got the book, you can go into chapter 8. Stuart's little 2 pages in there really kind of shares a little bit more details about his testimony, his story on this work. You've heard a lot today. And we've talked about, and we've entered into the chapter of habits, as I mentioned. And I love this stuff. And there's worksheets, and I break down the habit loop in here. Stuart knows this. He's been through it all. So there's a lot more to come in chapter 8. I'm going to come back on our next episode, and I'm going to teach you a little bit about how to break that down. So you're going to get some of the teachings that I did with Stuart, that I do with my clients. And there's a lot of great worksheets that are in here. So if you don't have a copy of the book, you can get it. The online course is live. You can go to suascommunity.com and get on that. So we've got everything virtual and online now. So many cool things. But what I love about this most, Stuart, this work, you asked me this right before we started filming. You were like, so, what was your question about it? How much do I love doing this? I
kind of knew the answer when I asked the question, but I said, do you love doing this?
Yeah, the podcast. And I said, oh my God, I fucking love it. And I love it because in this moment, I feel the power of presence. I'm not worried about what happened before I got here, where I'm going when I leave. I am giving you, this is my definition of love. And I've never met your wife, but I want her to know that I mean this in the most kind way, that love is total attention without judgment.
Yes.
And so that's what we're experiencing, that love for each other, for humanity, with zero judgment when we're fully present. And when we experience that together, and when our listeners and our viewers and the people on the course can learn to cultivate that, the world changes. And that's what I love knowing. I know what it feels like where I'm at now. You know what it's feel like. And it's like I want to run around and tell everybody and shake them and say, you can do this. And so this is just a roadmap. This isn't do what Yedda did, do what Stuart did. We're all on our own stories, our own journey. But the tools and the framework are here so you can follow along and dive in to do your work to find that same inner freedom. So Stuart, I love it. I love being able to shut up and sit down with you, the work we've done, being here in the studio today. And before we wrap up, I'm curious, I ask a lot of people this when they come in as guests. What parting words of wisdom do you have for our listeners and for our viewers?
parting words that I would have for listeners to the podcast is do the work. It can be life-changing. Do it on your own time. Be vulnerable. Be accessible to yourself. And if you want to change and become a more grounded, more present person that is better for your family, better for yourself, better in your community, I think doing the work, be it one-on-one with Yedda, in a coaching group, through listening to the podcast or doing the work and online worksheets can be life-changing in a very good way. So I'd encourage you and push you. If you're thinking about doing it. If you're in it, finish it.
I love it. I could just drop the mic there. All right, so you've heard it, and I'm going to pass this on. So we're going to come back on the next episode. I'm going to break down the habit loop a little bit more. It's been awesome to be with you all today. Stuart, thank you so much.
Thank you for having me, Yedda.
We're going to have you come back because, I'm writing a whole nother book now.
I'll come back
Stand
anytime.
Up and Be, Stand Up and Speak, Stand Up and Lead. I got a lot of things I'm floating
Sure.
around out there. So we'll have Stuart back, and I'll see you on the next episode. Until then, you guys have a great day. Talk to you soon.
May you know goodness. May you know peace. May you know content.